A quiet morning. Ensign Jack Thompson woke up to the sound of reveille echoing through the metal corridors of the USS Arizona. It was December 7, 1941, and the sun was just beginning to rise over Pearl Harbor. Jack stretched, rubbed his eyes, and glanced at the calendar pinned to the wall. The days seemed to blur together, but he had been counting down to his leave in 2 weeks, eagerly anticipating a visit home to see his family in Kansas. Jack was a young officer, fresh out of the Naval Academy, with a promising career ahead of him. He had always dreamed of serving his country, inspired by his grandfather's stories from World War I. The Arizona felt like a second home to him, with its tight-knit crew and the daily routines that had become almost comforting in their predictability. As he dressed, Jack thought about the letter he was writing to his younger sister, Emily. She had just turned 10, and he loved sending her stories about life on the ship, painting vivid pictures of his adventures. Today, he planned to finish the letter and drop it in the mail before his shift. Jack made his way to the mess hall, greeting fellow sailors as he went. The atmosphere was light-hearted, filled with the usual banter and laughter. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of bacon and eggs, creating a sense of normalcy that belied the tension brewing halfway across the world. After breakfast, Jack headed to his station on the deck. The morning air was crisp and cool, and he took a deep breath, savoring the tranquility of the harbor. The water shimmered under the early sunlight, and seagulls called out as they soared above. He exchanged salutes with his superior officers and chatted briefly with his friends, Petty Officer Mike Sullivan and Seaman Tom Reynolds, who were also on duty. As the clock ticked closer to 8 a.m., Jack stood by the railing, finishing his letter. He wrote about the beauty of the Hawaiian mornings, the camaraderie among the crew, and his excitement to see Emily and his parents soon. He was sealing the envelope when he noticed a distant droning noise. At first, he thought it might be routine maneuvers or drills, but as the noise grew louder, he realized something was amiss. Jack squinted towards the horizon, his brow furrowing. Dark specks appeared in the sky, growing larger by the second. Confusion rippled through the sailors on deck, and Jack's heart began to race. He turned to Mike, who was now peering through binoculars. "What do you see, Mike?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with unease. Mike lowered the binoculars, his face pale. "Planes. Lots of them. And they're not ours." Before Jack could react, the air was filled with the deafening roar of engines and the piercing scream of bombs. The first explosion rocked the Arizona, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the sky. Jack was thrown to the deck, the letter to Emily fluttering from his grasp. Pandemonium erupted as the sailors scrambled to their battle stations. Jack's training kicked in, and he pushed himself to his feet, shouting orders and helping his comrades. The once serene morning had transformed into a scene of chaos and destruction. Flames engulfed the ship, and the acrid smell of burning fuel filled the air. As Jack fought to maintain his composure, he couldn't help but think of his family. He had to survive this. He had to make it home. The attack on Pearl Harbor had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The first wave. The sky over Pearl Harbor darkened with the shadows of Japanese aircraft as they descended upon the naval base. The clock had barely struck 7:55 a.m. when the first wave of attackers unleashed their fury. Ensign Jack Thompson, still reeling from the initial explosion, scrambled to his feet amidst the chaos. "Get to your stations. Move, move, move," he yelled, his voice straining to rise above the deafening roar of engines and explosions. Jack's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The Arizona was under heavy attack, and he needed to help defend the ship. He grabbed a fire hose and began dousing the flames licking at the deck, trying to keep them from spreading further. His fellow sailors worked frantically beside him, their faces grim and determined. The first wave of planes, comprised of torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters, targeted the battleships lined up neatly in the harbor. The Japanese had planned their attack meticulously, and it showed. Torpedoes streaked through the water, striking the massive vessels with deadly precision. Jack watched in horror as the USS Oklahoma took several hits and began to capsize, trapping hundreds of men inside. A nearby explosion jolted Jack back to reality. He turned to see Petty Officer Mike Sullivan, his friend and comrade, manning an anti-aircraft gun. Jack raced over to assist him, knowing they had to fight back with everything they had. "Mike, I'm here. Let's take these bastards down," Jack shouted, his hands shaking as he loaded ammunition into the gun. Mike nodded, his face set in a mask of concentration. Together, they aimed at the incoming planes, firing round after round. The sky was a blur of smoke and fire, with Japanese Zero fighters weaving through the flak and returning fire with ruthless efficiency. Despite their best efforts, the Arizona shuddered under the relentless assault. Bombs rained down, each explosion sending shockwaves through the ship. Jack could barely hear himself think over the cacophony, but he forced himself to focus, to keep firing. Amidst the chaos, Jack spotted a plane diving straight for the Arizona. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he adjusted his aim and squeezed the trigger. The anti-aircraft gun roared to life, and to his relief, the plane veered off course, crashing into the water just short of the ship. "Nice shot, Jack," Mike yelled, a rare smile breaking through his grim expression. But there was no time to celebrate. More planes were coming, and the battle was far from over. Jack glanced around, taking in the devastation. Fires raged on multiple ships, and the harbor was littered with debris and oil slicks. The sky was thick with smoke, turning the morning sun into a dull, eerie glow. As the first wave of attackers began to retreat, a brief lull fell over Pearl Harbor. Jack and Mike took the opportunity to catch their breath and check on their comrades. Everywhere he looked, Jack saw the faces of men who, like him, were struggling to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. "Is everyone okay?" Jack called out, his voice hoarse. "We're alive, for now," Tom Reynolds replied, wiping soot from his face. "But we need to get these fires under control before the second wave hits." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. They had survived the initial onslaught, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Japanese had not come this far to leave the job half done. With grim determination, Jack and his fellow sailors set to work. They formed fire brigades, using hoses and buckets to battle the flames. Others tended to the wounded, their cries of pain cutting through the smoky air. The scent of burning oil and metal was overpowering, and Jack's eyes stung as he worked tirelessly to save his ship. As they struggled to regain some semblance of control, the distant drone of aircraft engines signaled the approach of the second wave. Jack's heart sank, but he pushed the fear aside. There was no time for hesitation or doubt. They had to be ready. The second wave came in like a storm, with bombers and fighters swooping down to finish what their comrades had started. Explosions rocked the harbor once more, and the battle resumed with renewed ferocity. Jack and Mike manned the anti-aircraft gun, firing relentlessly at the incoming planes. In the midst of the chaos, Jack thought of his family back in Kansas. He imagined his mother waiting anxiously for news, his father standing stoically by her side, and little Emily, blissfully unaware of the horrors unfolding halfway across the world. He vowed to survive, to see them again. As the second wave of attackers finally began to retreat, the damage was done. Pearl Harbor lay in ruins, with countless lives lost and ships destroyed. The Arizona, heavily damaged and engulfed in flames, listed dangerously. Jack and his comrades did what they could to keep her afloat, but it was clear that the ship was beyond saving. Exhausted and battered, Jack leaned against the railing, watching the Japanese planes disappear into the distance. The attack was over, but the battle for survival had just begun. Pearl Harbor would never be the same, and neither would he. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. There was no time to mourn, no time to dwell on what was lost. They had to move forward, to rebuild and fight back. The United States would enter the war, and Jack knew he would be there, standing alongside his fellow sailors, ready to defend his country. The sun, now high in the sky, cast a harsh light on the devastation. But in that light, Jack saw a glimmer of hope. They had survived this day, and they would survive the days to come. Chaos and heroism. The acrid smell of burning fuel and the deafening noise of explosions filled the air as Pearl Harbor continued to reel from the relentless attack. Ensign Jack Thompson's muscles ached from exertion, but he kept moving, knowing that lives depended on it. The second wave of Japanese planes had done its damage, but the sailors of the USS Arizona were far from defeated. "Over here, Jack," Mike Sullivan called out, pointing towards a group of trapped sailors near a section of the ship that had been heavily damaged. Jack nodded and sprinted towards them, his boots slipping on the slick, debris-strewn deck. The heat from the fires was intense, and he could feel the sweat pouring down his face. As he reached the trapped men, he saw that a piece of the deck had collapsed, pinning several sailors underneath. "Hang on, we're going to get you out," Jack shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. With the help of Mike and Tom Reynolds, Jack began to lift the debris, straining against the weight. The trapped sailors groaned in pain, but their eyes were filled with determination. Inch by inch, they managed to free the men, pulling them to safety one by one. "Thanks, Jack," one of the sailors, Seaman Joe Martinez, gasped as he was helped to his feet. "I thought we were done for." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "We're all in this together, Joe. Let's get you to the medics." As they escorted the injured sailors to a makeshift triage area, Jack couldn't help but marvel at the resilience and bravery of his comrades. Despite the overwhelming odds, they refused to give up. It was this spirit that gave him hope, even in the darkest moments. Back on the deck, the situation remained dire. The Arizona was listing heavily, and the fire showed no signs of abating. Jack and the others worked tirelessly, battling the flames and tending to the wounded. He could see the devastation all around him, the wreckage of planes, the twisted metal of once proud ships, and the bodies of fallen comrades. In the midst of the chaos, Jack spotted a group of Japanese planes lining up for another attack run. His heart sank as he realized their target, the Arizona's magazine, where the ship's ammunition was stored. If they hit it, the resulting explosion would be catastrophic. "Mike, we need to take those planes down now," Jack yelled, rushing to the anti-aircraft gun. Mike was already there, loading ammunition with grim determination. "Let's give them everything we've got, Jack." Together, they aimed the gun and fired, the barrel glowing red hot from the sustained use. The sky was filled with tracer rounds as they targeted the incoming planes. One by one, the planes began to falter, some spiraling out of control and crashing into the harbor. But it wasn't enough. One plane broke through their defenses, diving straight for the Arizona. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he watched it release its payload. Time seemed to slow as the bomb hurtled towards the ship, its deadly intent clear. "Brace yourselves," Jack shouted, throwing himself to the deck as the bomb exploded with a deafening roar. The shockwave rocked the Arizona, and Jack felt the heat of the blast wash over him. For a moment, he couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched ringing in his ears. When he finally managed to push himself up, he saw that the ship's magazine had been hit. Smoke and flames billowed into the sky, and the deck beneath him trembled ominously. "Jack, we need to abandon ship," Mike shouted, pulling him to his feet. Jack knew he was right. The Arizona was beyond saving, and staying on board would mean certain death. He and Mike helped the wounded to the lifeboats, their movements hurried but careful. There was no time to lose, yet they couldn't leave anyone behind. As they lowered the last lifeboat into the water, Jack took one final look at the Arizona. She had been his home, a symbol of strength and pride. Now, she was a burning wreck, a testament to the ferocity of the attack. His heart ached, but he knew he had to focus on survival. "Let's go," Jack said, his voice hoarse with emotion. The lifeboat bobbed in the water as they paddled away from the stricken ship. All around them, the harbor was a scene of chaos and devastation. Jack saw other ships burning, sailors in the water, and the distant silhouettes of Japanese planes retreating into the horizon. They reached the shore, where medics and rescuers were already hard at work tending to the wounded. Jack helped his comrades onto the beach, making sure they received the care they needed. Exhausted and emotionally drained, he collapsed onto the sand, his mind reeling from the events of the day. As he lay there, staring up at the sky, Jack thought about the men who hadn't made it. Friends and shipmates, their lives cut short in an instant. He thought about his family back home, and how he would have to find a way to tell them about the horrors he had witnessed. But amidst the grief and despair, there was also a spark of determination. Jack knew that the attack on Pearl Harbor would not go unanswered. The United States would rise to the challenge, and he would be a part of that effort. The sacrifices of his comrades would not be in vain. As the sun began to set, casting a red glow over the smoke-filled sky, Jack got to his feet. He walked over to where Mike and Tom were sitting, their faces etched with exhaustion and sorrow. "We made it through today," Jack said, his voice steady. "And we'll make it through tomorrow. For the men we lost, for our families, and for our country." Mike nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For the Arizona," he said quietly. Tom placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "For all of us." The three men stood together, a silent vow passing between them. They would carry on, despite the losses and the pain. They would fight for their fallen comrades, for their country, and for the future. The night fell over Pearl Harbor, but in the hearts of Jack and his friends, a new dawn was beginning. It was a dawn forged in fire and blood, a dawn that would see them through the trials ahead. The aftermath. The morning after the attack on Pearl Harbor dawned with an eerie silence. The once bustling naval base now lay in ruins, a stark contrast to the peaceful paradise it had been just 24 hours earlier. Ensign Jack Thompson stood on the shore, gazing at the wreckage of the USS Arizona. The ship, which had been his home, was now a twisted mass of metal, still smoldering from the relentless assault. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning oil, and the sky was a dull gray from the lingering haze. Jack's body ached from the previous day's exertions, but the emotional toll was far greater. He had lost friends, comrades, and a part of himself in the attack. Yet, amidst the devastation, he knew he had to press on. "Jack, we need to help with the recovery efforts," Mike Sullivan said, coming up beside him. His face was drawn with fatigue, but his eyes were determined. Jack nodded, tearing his gaze away from the Arizona. "You're right. There's a lot of work to do. Together, they joined the other survivors in the grim task of searching for the wounded and recovering the dead. The scale of the destruction was overwhelming. Ships lay capsized or sunk, their hulls breached by torpedoes and bombs. The harbor was littered with debris, and oil slicks shimmered on the surface of the water. Jack and Mike worked alongside medics and fellow sailors, pulling injured men from the wreckage and carrying them to makeshift medical stations. The cries of the wounded filled the air, a haunting reminder of the attack's brutality. Jack's heart ached for each man he helped, knowing that many of them would never fully recover from their injuries. As the day wore on, Jack found himself at the Naval Hospital, where the medical staff was overwhelmed by the influx of casualties. Nurses and doctors moved with urgency, their faces etched with exhaustion. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, whom Jack had seen in the mess hall the day before, was among them, her hands covered in blood as she tended to the wounded. "Sarah," Jack said, approaching her as she took a brief respite. "Is there anything I can do to help?" She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Jack, we need all the help we can get. Can you assist with triage? We have more wounded than we can handle." "Of course," Jack replied, rolling up his sleeves. "Just tell me what to do." Sarah gave him a grateful smile and led him to a section of the hospital where sailors with less severe injuries were being treated. Jack moved from one man to another, offering words of comfort and doing what he could to ease their pain. It was heartbreaking work, but he felt a sense of purpose in helping his fellow sailors. As night fell, the recovery efforts continued. Jack and Mike took turns resting and working, driven by the need to do something, anything, to make a difference. They were joined by civilians from the island, who volunteered their time and resources to assist the military. The sense of community and shared determination was a small beacon of hope amidst the darkness. In the quiet moments between tasks, Jack's thoughts turned to his family. He knew that news of the attack would have reached them by now, and he could only imagine their worry. He longed to write to them, to reassure them that he was alive, but there was no time for personal matters. The needs of the wounded took precedence. 3 days after the attack, a memorial service was held for the fallen. The sailors gathered at the harbor, their faces somber as they listened to the chaplain's words. Jack stood with Mike and Tom, their eyes fixed on the remains of the Arizona, which had become a tomb for many of their comrades. "Let us remember the brave souls who gave their lives in service to their country," the chaplain intoned. "Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. We stand together, united in our grief and our resolve to carry on their legacy." Tears streamed down Jack's face as he bowed his head in silent prayer. He thought of the men who had been like brothers to him, now lost to the sea. The pain of their loss was sharp, but it was tempered by a fierce determination to honor their memory. After the service, Admiral Chester Nimitz addressed the assembled sailors. His presence was a source of strength, his words a rallying cry. "We have been dealt a severe blow, but we are not defeated," Nimitz declared. "The attack on Pearl Harbor has awakened a sleeping giant. We will rebuild, we will fight, and we will prevail. Each of you has a role to play in this effort, and I have no doubt that you will rise to the challenge." Jack felt a surge of pride and resolve as he listened to the Admiral's speech. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but he knew that he and his comrades were ready to face it. The attack on Pearl Harbor had changed them all, forging them into a hardened, determined force. In the days that followed, the base began to slowly recover. Ships were salvaged, repairs were made, and plans were laid for the United States' entry into World War II. Jack threw himself into his duties, finding solace in the work. The camaraderie among the sailors was stronger than ever, their shared experience binding them together. One evening, as Jack sat on the shore watching the sun set over the harbor, he was joined by Mike and Tom. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. "We've been through hell," Tom said quietly, breaking the silence. "But we're still here. And we've got a job to do." "You're right," Jack replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We're going to fight back, and we're going to win. For the men we lost, and for the future." Mike nodded, a determined look on his face. "For the Arizona, and for all of us." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water, Jack felt a sense of hope. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been a devastating blow, but it had also ignited a fire within them. They would rebuild, they would fight, and they would honor the memory of those who had fallen. The night was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the attack. But in the hearts of Jack and his comrades, a new resolve burned brightly. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their mission to defend their country and their way of life. Rallying the forces. The days and weeks following the attack on Pearl Harbor were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The devastation of December 7 had galvanized the nation, and the United States was now fully committed to the war effort. Ensign Jack Thompson and his fellow sailors found themselves at the center of this monumental shift, their lives transformed by the call to arms. On December 8, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress and the nation, delivering his famous Day of Infamy speech. Jack listened intently as the president's words echoed through the naval base, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan, Roosevelt proclaimed. We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. As Congress declared war on Japan, Jack felt a surge of determination. The attack on Pearl Harbor had left its mark, but it had also sparked a fierce resolve in the hearts of the American people. The once neutral nation was now a formidable force, ready to take on the challenges of war. Jack and his comrades were quickly mobilized to assist in the war effort. The base at Pearl Harbor was transformed into a hive of activity, with ships being repaired, new recruits arriving, and supplies being stockpiled. The sense of urgency was palpable, and everyone worked tirelessly to prepare for the battles ahead. One morning, Jack received orders to report to the newly arrived Admiral Chester Nimitz, who had been appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. Jack felt a mix of nervousness and pride as he made his way to the Admiral's quarters, aware that this meeting would be pivotal for his future role in the war. Ensign Thompson reporting as ordered, "Sir," Jack said, snapping to attention as he stood before Admiral Nimitz. Nimitz, a tall man with a commanding presence, looked up from his desk and nodded. "At ease, Ensign. I've been hearing good things about you and your actions during the attack." Jack relaxed slightly, though he remained focused. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my duty." Nimitz smiled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of seriousness and warmth. "That's exactly the attitude we need. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a wake-up call for all of us, and we have a long road ahead. I need men like you who are committed and ready to fight." Jack felt a swell of pride at the Admiral's words. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes, sir." "Good," Nimitz said, leaning back in his chair. "I have a special assignment for you. We're organizing a task force to strike back at the Japanese. It's called the Doolittle Raid, and it's going to be our first major offensive. I want you to be part of the team." Jack's heart raced with excitement. The Doolittle Raid had been the subject of hushed conversations and speculation among the sailors, and now he was being asked to join it. "It would be an honor, sir." Nimitz nodded approvingly. "You'll be working with some of the best men in the fleet. This mission is dangerous, but it's crucial to our strategy. We'll be launching a surprise attack on Tokyo, showing the Japanese that we're not to be underestimated." Over the next few weeks, Jack and the other members of the task force underwent intensive training. They learned the intricacies of the B-25 bombers that would be used in the raid, practiced carrier takeoffs and landings, and honed their skills in navigation and combat. The camaraderie among the men grew strong, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and the knowledge that they were part of something historic. Jack's nights were filled with dreams of the mission, his mind racing with thoughts of the challenges they would face. He often found himself thinking of his family, drawing strength from the love and support he knew they would offer. He wrote letters to them whenever he could, though he kept the details of the mission vague to maintain security. Finally, the day of the raid arrived. The task force set sail from Pearl Harbor, the air heavy with anticipation. As they approached their launch point, the tension among the men was palpable. Jack could see the determination in their eyes, mirroring his own resolve. On April 18, 1942, the bombers were launched from the USS Hornet, their engines roaring as they took to the skies. Jack's heart pounded as he watched the planes disappear into the distance, knowing that they were striking back at the heart of the enemy. The raid was a daring and risky operation, but it achieved its objective. The bombers successfully hit their targets in Tokyo and other cities, delivering a powerful message to the Japanese. While the physical damage was limited, the psychological impact was immense. The Japanese were shocked by the audacity of the attack, and American morale soared. Jack and his comrades returned to Pearl Harbor as heroes, their spirits lifted by the success of the mission. The Doolittle Raid marked a turning point in the war, showing that the United States was capable of striking back with force and precision. As the months passed, Jack continued to serve with distinction, participating in numerous battles and operations across the Pacific. He and his fellow sailors faced countless challenges, but their resolve never wavered. They fought with courage and determination, driven by the memory of Pearl Harbor and the desire to bring justice to their fallen comrades. Through it all, Jack remained in touch with his family, sharing his experiences and drawing strength from their unwavering support. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. One evening, as Jack stood on the deck of his ship, watching the sun set over the Pacific, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The attack on Pearl Harbor had changed his life forever, but it had also given him a purpose. He was part of something greater than himself, a force for justice and freedom. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jack made a silent vow. He would continue to fight, to honor the memory of those who had fallen, and to ensure that their sacrifices were never forgotten. The journey was far from over, but Jack was ready for whatever lay ahead. He knew that, together with his comrades, he could face any challenge and emerge victorious. A new dawn. As the war progressed, Ensign Jack Thompson and his comrades found themselves engaged in battles across the vast expanse of the Pacific. From the Coral Sea to Midway, Guadalcanal to Leyte Gulf, they faced the relentless advance of the Japanese forces with unwavering determination. Each battle brought its own set of challenges, but Jack's resolve never wavered. By early 1945, the tide of war had begun to turn in favor of the Allies. The once mighty Japanese fleet was now on the defensive, and the United States was preparing for the final push towards Japan. Jack, now a seasoned officer, had risen through the ranks, earning the respect and admiration of his peers. One evening, as he stood on the deck of the USS Missouri, Jack looked out over the tranquil waters. The battleship had become his new home, a symbol of strength and resilience. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the horizon, a stark contrast to the memories of that fateful day in Pearl Harbor. "Thinking about home?" a familiar voice asked. Jack turned to see Mike Sullivan, his longtime friend and comrade, standing beside him. Mike had also risen through the ranks, and the bond between them had only grown stronger through their shared experiences. "Yeah," Jack replied, a wistful smile on his face. "Hard to believe how much has changed since Pearl Harbor." Mike nodded, his expression serious. "We've come a long way, Jack. But we still have a job to do." Jack knew he was right. The war was not over, and the final battles would be the toughest. The upcoming invasion of Okinawa, the last stepping stone to Japan, loomed large in their minds. It would be a brutal and costly fight, but it was necessary to bring an end to the conflict. As the days turned into weeks, the preparations for the invasion intensified. The sailors and Marines trained relentlessly, their determination fueled by the memory of their fallen comrades. Jack took every opportunity to inspire and encourage his men, knowing that their success depended on their unity and resolve. On April 1, 1945, the invasion of Okinawa began. The skies were filled with the roar of planes and the thunder of naval gunfire as the Allies launched their assault. Jack and his crew were at the forefront, providing crucial support to the ground forces. The battle was fierce and unforgiving, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Jack witnessed acts of incredible bravery and sacrifice, as his men fought with everything they had. The Japanese resistance was tenacious, but the Allies slowly gained ground, inching closer to victory. One night, as Jack stood watch on the deck, he received a message that sent a chill down his spine. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had passed away. The news spread quickly through the ranks, casting a pall of sorrow over the troops. Roosevelt had been a beacon of hope and strength, and his loss was deeply felt. Despite their grief, the men continued to fight with unwavering determination. They knew that victory was within their grasp, and they were determined to see it through. Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the memory of the president who had inspired them all. Finally, after months of grueling combat, Okinawa was secured. The cost had been high, but the victory brought them one step closer to ending the war. As Jack stood on the deck of the Missouri, watching the American flag wave proudly in the breeze, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The war in the Pacific continued to rage, but the end was in sight. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, followed by a second bomb on Nagasaki 3 days later. The devastating power of the bombs forced Japan to reconsider its position, and on August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. On September 2, 1945, the formal surrender ceremony took place on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Jack stood proudly among the assembled officers, witnessing the historic moment. As General Douglas MacArthur and representatives of the Japanese government signed the surrender documents, Jack felt a wave of emotions wash over him. The war was finally over. The sacrifices of so many had not been in vain. Jack thought of the men who had fought and died at Pearl Harbor, and throughout the Pacific, and he knew that their legacy would live on. As the ceremony concluded, Jack turned to Mike, who was standing beside him. "We did it, Mike. We finally did it." Mike nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "For the Arizona, and for all of them." Jack looked out over the waters of Tokyo Bay, his heart filled with hope for the future. The war had taken a tremendous toll, but it had also shown the strength and resilience of the human spirit. He knew that rebuilding would take time, but he was ready to face the challenges ahead. In the years that followed, Jack returned to the United States and was reunited with his family. The joy of seeing them again was overwhelming, and he cherished every moment with them. He shared his stories, not only of the battles but of the camaraderie and bravery of his fellow sailors. Jack continued to serve in the Navy, helping to rebuild and strengthen the fleet. His experiences during the war had shaped him into a leader, and he was determined to honor the memory of those who had fought and sacrificed. As he stood on the deck of a newly commissioned ship, watching the sun rise over the harbor, Jack felt a deep sense of peace. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been a turning point, a catalyst for a nation to come together and fight for a common cause. It had forged bonds of friendship and courage that would last a lifetime. The new dawn brought with it the promise of a brighter future, one built on the sacrifices and resilience of those who had come before. Jack knew that he would always carry the memory of Pearl Harbor with him, but he also looked forward with hope and determination. As the ship sailed out of the harbor, Jack looked back one last time, his heart filled with gratitude. He whispered a silent prayer for his fallen comrades and turned his gaze to the horizon, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Thanks for watching The Animated General. Out.